Hello. Prince Andrew has failed in his bid to get a civil case which alleges that he sexually assaulted a 17-year-old girl dismissed by a US judge. Virginia Giuffre, who's now 38, is suing the prince, claiming that he abused her in 2001. Prince Andrew's lawyer said the case should be thrown out, citing a 2009 deal that Ms. Giuffre signed with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. But today, a New York judge ruled that her claim could be heard. Judge Lewis Kaplan's decision amounted to 46 pages, saying the agreement cannot be said to benefit the Duke of York. So, what is Prince Andrew accused of? Virginia Giuffre, then known as Virginia Roberts, alleges that she was trafficked to have sex with Prince Andrew. It's alleged that she was sexually abused by the prince on 3 occasions. Ms. Giuffre claims that it happened in London, in New York and in Epstein's private island in the Caribbean. Prince Andrew has consistently denied the allegations. Here is our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
So what does he do now, and what does the royal family do with him? After months during which Andrew tried first to ignore the case, then to avoid court papers being served on him, and having finally appointed US lawyers to try to get the case dismissed, he finds himself facing some stark choices. His motion to get the case dismissed having failed, Andrew's options amount to this. He can settle out of court. There'd be no admission of liability, but he would pay a perhaps substantial sum to Virginia Giuffre. He can default, that is, ignore the court case, and by default there would be a finding against him. Finally, he could fight it out in court. He'd have to give a deposition under oath, the rival stories would be tested, the matter would be decided in open court. Lawyers who've been following the case say none of the options will be attractive to him.
Andrew's got no good options now. He can't make things better. So essentially, I think he's either going to have to engage in the trial process or he's going to have to settle. And that may well be his least worst option.
And then there's the question of Andrew's future within the royal family. 10 years ago, at the time of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, Andrew was very much in evidence. Much has happened in the years since, and most of it, in the case of Andrew, has been deeply embarrassing for the royal family. In his Newsnight interview, the one in which he said he couldn't remember meeting the then 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre, Andrew was asked whether he felt he'd damaged the Queen and the royal family.
I don't believe it's been damaging to the Queen at all. Has to me. If I was in a position to be able to answer all these questions in a way that gave sensible answers other than the ones that I've given that gave closure, then I'd love it. But I'm afraid I can't, because I'm just as much in the dark as many people.
Yet for all Andrew's denials of wrongdoing, might this be the time for him to withdraw entirely from public life? He has retained some positions. He's Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, for example. Behind the scenes, there's unease. A feeling that in this of all years, the year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, it would be preferable for her second son to recognise that, as he said in that Newsnight interview, he's let the side down, and that he should therefore bow out gracefully and completely. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, we can speak now to our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik. Neda, this ruling from the judge that's just happened in the last few hours was very strongly worded.
Yeah, absolutely, Rita. And I don't think that really came as much as a surprise to those of us who followed the hearing last week in the matter, because the judge took a very tough position in that hearing as well, not seeming to be convinced at all by Prince Andrew's lawyers' arguments. And in this written decision, he said he denied in all respects Prince Andrew's arguments to dismiss the case. And really, right from the start, he talked about what a high bar needed to be met here. He says that this court must accept as true all well-pleaded factual allegations in the complaint and draw all reasonable inferences that can be drawn from them in light most favorable to the plaintiff, so most favorable to Virginia Giuffre. And he's saying that this 2009 agreement was just way too ambiguous on one hand, and on the other hand, that it was up to the parties themselves, so Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, to enforce the contract. He says that there is no clear intent or purpose to the contract to directly or substantially benefit Prince Andrew. And so therefore, this is a really, really strongly worded decision against Prince Andrew, and this case will go forward.
People that we've been talking to have suggested that Prince Andrew does have a small chance of being able to appeal. But what are the chances of him asking to appeal successfully?
Yeah, that's right, Rita. You know, normally in court, motions to dismiss by default you're not able to appeal. The case goes forward until its conclusion and then can be appealed to a higher court. But in theory, there is a small chance here that Prince Andrew's lawyers could issue an interlocutory appeal. Now, I think what's really important to remember about that is that they need the judge's permission in this case to even put that appeal forward. And given how strongly the judge worded this written decision, really leaving no room for interpretation, it's unclear he would allow that. That interlocutory appeal is usually used in situations where the judge thought there was really a tough decision that he was facing. It could have gone either way. But in this case, he really seemed to be very clear on his position. Nevertheless, they can try for that appeal. We are waiting to see if that is a route that the prince's lawyers decide to take, because certainly his options at the moment are not looking great.
And Neda, has there been a reaction to this ruling in the US?
We haven't received reaction yet from Virginia Giuffre's side that I know of, or Prince Andrew's side yet. But I can tell you certainly from those who have been following this case, there's really been no surprise that this was the route the judge was going to take. I think the key question now is what Prince Andrew does. And as we saw in Nick Witchell's packages there, kind of outlining his three key options, with neither being kind of a real benefit to either. It's really weighing the risk benefits there for the prince.
OK, thank you very much indeed. That's our correspondent Neda Tawfik reporting for us. Well, I'm joined now by our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond. Johnny, we have to remember in all of this that the Duke of York strenuously denies the allegations. He always has. Yep. But the consensus seems to be that he needs to avoid at all costs having to appear in court.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that the consensus is that from lawyers that I've been speaking to over the last few weeks is that just the process of this trial going forward will be immensely difficult for him to navigate and immensely challenging for his reputation. And so nearly everyone has been saying, he's got to settle. He's got to settle. Now, remember, Rita, it takes two to tango on a settlement. It's not up to Prince Andrew to say, OK, I'm settling. Here's the money. Virginia Giuffre, his accuser, and her lawyers will need to agree. And it may be that she's not interested in just money. Maybe she wants more than that. Maybe she wants the trial itself. Maybe she wants some kind of admission from him. We don't know. But certainly the sort of cool heads amongst the US legal profession and those who study it on this side of the Atlantic as well are saying he does not want to go through the process of trial, partly because of what's called the pre-trial discovery phase, which is where he can be compelled to give testimony in a US deposition, which is where they can force documents from him, his diaries from him, evidence about whether or not he sweats or not. And then
public,
the trial
Johnny?
itself.
Is that public?
That wouldn't be public in theory when it goes to the other side's lawyers, but it would become public during the trial. And yes, stuff leaks from different legal parties in these cases. These, especially in the US, cases do get slugged out in public through informal means. That would be horrible for him. And then the trial itself. I mean, the idea that the Queen's second son is going to turn up in a US courtroom is pretty fantastical. If he doesn't, he loses anyway. If he does, it would be one of the most astonishing moments in the royal family's modern history. It's very difficult to see. We've got no word from Prince Andrew's legal team yet. I imagine they are scrabbling to work out quite how badly wrong this has gone, because let's not forget, nearly every step of the way this has gone wrong for the prince. He at first tried to say that he hadn't been served with the papers that meant that this could go forward. The US judge said that's nonsense. Then he came up with the 2009 deal that has just been roundly dismissed. he must be thinking, you would presume, about the advice that he's been receiving from his lawyers so far, and thinking very quickly about what his next move will be.